Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Hitting the Mark with Mike Conley. In my last segment, we left off with Abraham and Sarah and Ishmael, the child, the progenitor of the Arab nations. I want to take a little turn in the road today for a moment because right now this world is suffering from deception. And I want to take you back in history a few years ago and show you how easy it is to be deceived and how this entire nation is right now at this very moment being deceived, especially about our monetary system. So let me introduce to you at this time two of the world's most prominent leaders of their era. Both of these men, very powerful, but yet were puppets whose strings were being pulled by a group of financiers in Europe. And they used these two men to initiate the most diabolical of all schemes, something called the New World Order, which I'm sure you have heard about. But as I go through this, I think you'll be surprised at how deception played a part in this. The first leader was described by George Bernard Shaw saying that his movement was most progressive. Mahatma Gandhi, champion of nonviolence, called him a Superman. The then Archbishop of Canterbury called him the one great figure of Europe. Winston Churchill declared, "If we were countrymen, I am sure that I would have been with him from beginning to end." He also pointed to his gentle and simple bearing and his calm, detached poise. What leader were these men talking about? They were talking about none other than Benito Mussolini. Let's go to the second leader. Our second leader, in the words of French intellectual André Gide, said this: "He behaves like a genius. I particularly admire the diversity of his methods. Soon, even those he vanquishes will feel compelled, while cursing him, to admire him." Arnold Toynbee, liberal historian, was sure this was a man of peace. And finally, in 1934, the president of Hunter College declared this: "This man was destined to go down in history as a cross between Hotspur and Uncle Toby, and to be as immortal as either." Who was this leader? None other than Adolf Hitler. You see, the descriptions given by the leaders in Europe concerning these two men were based on deception. Don't think that people at the highest echelon of leadership in the world cannot be deceived. In this day, deception is the daily order of our business. These men of renown were totally deceived. The voice of Yeshua clearly warned his followers about deception in Matthew 24. Yeshua had just left the temple area and prophesied to them about the destruction of the temple. One of the marks of a real prophet is that what he says must come to pass. This is why we know that Muhammad was never a prophet. Yeshua told them about the destruction of the temple, and in AD 70, it was destroyed. Yeshua is sitting on the Mount of Olives, and his disciples came to him privately. He had just told them about how everything was going to go down in the end times. And they asked him, "Tell us, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" And instead of answering them, he says this: "Watch out that no one deceives you." I would like to now take a look at two leaders of our past who desperately tried to hit the mark. And they paid the ultimate sacrifice for their effort. One of these great leaders was Abraham Lincoln. I realize that what I'm about to share with you, many of you perhaps may know. But when you look at what's going on in our lives today, that makes what these two men knew even more valuable. Why would you assassinate a president? And why must it be covered up? What's totally trying to be hid from the American people? Today, let's let some facts speak for themselves. Concerning President Lincoln, during the Civil War, he needed money to finance the war from the North. The bankers were going to charge him between 24 and 36% interest. Now, this was horrifying to Lincoln, and he became greatly distressed over this interest charge. He was a man of principle, and he knew that he would plunge this country into a debt that it would find itself totally impossible to ever pay back. What does he do? He was advised to get Congress to pass a law authorizing the printing of full legal tender treasury notes to pay for the war. Lincoln finally got them to recognize the great benefits of this issue. And he wrote this: "We gave the people of the Republic the greatest blessing they have ever had, their own paper money to pay their own debts." The treasury notes were printed on green ink, and thereby they were called greenbacks. I'm sure you remember that. Lincoln printed $400 million worth of greenbacks. And think of it, it was debt-free interest-free money. It served as legal tender for all debt, public and private. It's what he used to pay the soldiers and civil service employees, and it bought supplies for the war effort. Now pay attention, and you may even want to take notes to look this up. Shortly after that happened, the London Times printed this: "If that mischievous financial policy, which had its origins in the North American Republic, should become hardened down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts, and it will be without a debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous beyond precedent in the history of the civilized governments of the world. The brains and the wealth of all countries will go to North America. That government must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe." You see, beloved, we had one monstrous change globally over the years. And that is, we began to make a move from a monarch style of government to a republic style of government. And the monarchs were not having it. Now the bankers, they understood one thing. The only thing that is a threat to their power is a sovereign government printing interest-free and debt-free paper money. And they knew that if Lincoln did that, that it would break the power of the international bankers. Now, in retaliation for this, after this was published in the London Times, the British government, which was controlled by London and other European bankers, and at some point in the future I will cover that for you, London moved to support the Confederate South, thereby hoping to defeat Lincoln and the Union and destroy the very government they deemed had to be destroyed. And this was all based, beloved, on the printing of interest-free, debt-free money. But a couple of things got in their way. The people in Britain were getting tired of slavery. And Lincoln knew it. So he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that slavery in the states was abolished. Secondly, and not many know this, the Tsar of Russia sent a portion of the Russian Navy to the United States on the East Coast with orders that its admiral would operate under the command of Abraham Lincoln. The ships of the Russian Navy became such a threat to the British Navy that they, in fact, put up a blockade. And the British Navy had to back off concerning its support of the South. The bankers were not going to give in this easy. They were determined to put an end to Lincoln's interest-free, debt-free greenback system. And as you know, he was assassinated by an agent of the bankers after the war ended. After this, Congress revoked the greenback law and they enacted in its place the National Banking Act. The national banks were to be privately owned, and the national bank notes they issued were to be interest-bearing. The act also provided that the greenbacks would be retired from circulation as soon as they came back to the Treasury in the payment of taxes. In 1972, the Treasury Department was asked to compute the amount of interest that would have been paid if that $400 million in greenbacks had been borrowed at interest. They saved $4 billion. Over time, there were changes in the money and the banking laws for probably the next 50 years. In 1913, the bankers were able to get the Federal Reserve Act passed through Congress, which replaced the National Banking Act. And we now move in to a horrific time financially for the United States. With the passing of the Federal Reserve Act, Congress gave up its power to create its own money. The Constitution of the United States granted Congress that power, and they gave it up. And they gave it over to private bankers, and they called it the Federal Reserve, of which it is neither federal nor does it hold reserves. Now we have a central bank, privately owned, and shortly after the passing of the Federal Reserve Act, it was passed under something called the Owens-Corning Glass Act. We reinstituted an income tax, a graduated income tax. A central bank and a graduated income tax are two of the main tenets of the Communist Manifesto. I have a quote here from a gentleman that I'm going to talk about at length in the future. This is Meyer Ansel Rothschild. Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws. So here we have a president who knew the dangers of interest-free money to the European bankers, and he had the guts to do it anyway. Moving on in history, we come to John Kennedy. No one since Lincoln dared to go against the system and create their own money. And then John Kennedy shows up. And he was not afraid to buck the system. He believed that the Federal Reserve System would, at one point in the future, destroy the United States. He had absolutely no tolerance for it, And he felt that the Federal Reserve and the central banking system was corrupt. And like Lincoln, on July 4th, 1963, he signed a presidential document. It's called Executive Order 11110. It amended another executive order that was written in 1951 concerning kind of the same thing. This order gave Kennedy as president legal clearance to create his own money to run the country. Money that would belong to the people. Now listen, interest and debt-free money. He had printed something called a United States note, and he completely ignored Federal Reserve notes from the private banks of the Fed. He issued well over $4 million of cash. And everybody knew that President Kennedy was out to undermine the Federal Reserve System. And we all know, November of 1963, he was assassinated. No reason given for anyone wanting to commit such a crime. But for those who know anything about money and banking, it wouldn't take long to put those pieces together. When we look at how this all comes together, there's one interesting note here. One day after the Kennedy assassination, all the United States notes that he had issued were called out of circulation. And the very first act on the plane coming back from Texas that Lyndon Johnson put his pen to was to eradicate President Kennedy's edict about the Federal Reserve. These two men had tremendous courage. And we have paid the price, and we will continue to pay the price for a very long time. The Torah is very clear on the proper way to use money for the good of the individual and the nation. Just because your countrymen have a need does not give men the license to take opportunity for profit. In the Torah, Exodus 22, verse 25 says this: "If you lend money to one of my people who is among you, and is in need of it, do not be like a moneylender. Charge him no interest." The loaning of money was part of the nation's social responsibility to its people. In Deuteronomy 23:19-20, it says this: "Do not charge your brother interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but not a brother Israelite." Now, there is a tremendous amount more that needs to be said concerning this. But I think this is a good place to stop today. When you look at what has happened to this nation, And now you look at our sitting president, whose sole responsibility when he was put into office was to take this great nation down to third world status. Nobody is going to tell you that. That is never going to be on the news. But when you look at our nation today and what is happening to it, other parts of the world are coming here in great numbers. Our nation is beginning to look very much like the third world. I submit to you, beloved, that is the reason that our sitting president was put in office. That was his purpose. And as you can see, it has been carried out. It wasn't very long ago, we had 51 million people on food stamps. We are in a horrible mess. Where are the Abraham Lincolns and the John Kennedys that will speak up? I want to thank you once again for taking a time to listen to this video. Kennedy and Lincoln hit the mark, but they paid the price. If there's a mark that you need to hit in life, are you willing to hit the mark? I hope you are. I want you to have a blessed life, but I also want you to be strong and to be brave. And by doing so, you will be free. Blessings on you and your family. And until we meet again, hitting the mark means to be brave and strong so you can be free. Blessings on all of you.